But then we have to move on to the question, which is that, but there's a lot of people in the rest of the world, in the non-Islamic world, especially who are people who are politically on the left, although I'm also seeing a little bit of this now happening on the far right as well. But they're in love with this narrative. And it's so... I basically have to laugh and find it humorous that it seems to go against so many of their principles about minority rights, about indigeneity, about, especially even people living in the Palestinian territories, a lack of rights for people of certain minorities and orientations, all the rest of it. Can you just talk a bit about that, and how do we make sense of that at a deeper level in terms of just the hatred there? Because that, it seems to kind of not really, what you said so far doesn't really seem to explain that.
Well, okay, so there you got a set of different issues. And by the way, socialism and Marxism function very much like a religion. Right? They play the role in their adherence that religions play. They give ideological purity. They define the world in good and evil. They give groupthink, certainty. They do a lot of. They basically function exactly like a religion. You've had Jewish Marxists from the beginning. I mean, they were born to a Jewish family, but their religion is Marxism, right, or socialism. And a big part of that orthodoxy from the beginning was anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist. Again, the early communist thinkers were almost all very, very ferociously anti their Jewish roots, ferociously anti anything resembling Jewish peoplehood, and that meant they were anti-Zionist from the beginning. Now, what that ideology, what the left has kind of bought into, is another model. And you're right, it is ironic that they link up with the groups that they would generally be completely not ideologically aligned with. They'd be ideological enemies of. But what they've managed to do is make the Jew the colonialist, right? So the exploiter, the oppressor. They've got all these words for the Jew. Now, not the Jew. God forbid, we don't ever hate Jews. Just the Jewish national entity and polity is the most oppressive, repressive, colonialist in the world, right? And that's the same typical process. Now, the irony that I tell you, I was a few weeks ago in America, and I was speaking to some students from Canada. And I think in Canada, what they're up against is everybody's now on the left is into this indigenous rights. And one of the Jewish students said to ferociously anti-Israel student said, when they're talking about October, the actual October the 7th attacks, which they thought was justified, right? And they said, well, if an indigenous native tribesman from Canada came to your door and started saying, we're going to kill you all unless you get out of here, what would you say? And the student turned around and said, if they were ready to take over my home again, I'd give it up for them because they have the rights to it. And this guy was just flabbergasted. And I said to him, I wish I was there with you. Because, I'd have said to the guy, I said, but they haven't been there for hundreds of years, right? There's been centuries. You've been running the land and building the cities and building the place, right? And the guy would say, no, but I don't care. Indigenous rights, even from centuries ago, Trump's, they have a right to kick us all out of our homes. Well, what about the indigenous people of the land of Israel who were kicked out of their homes? Do they get the right to come back centuries later? Even not kicking anybody out of their homes, do they get the right to come back centuries later? And then, we have to find some distinction. You understand how ludicrous it is?
Or we're not the real Jews anymore, they'd say.
Right, that's another example. Yeah. But the point is, and that's what happened. So 1948. I mean, Jews settling the land and dividing the Ottoman Empire and giving a little bit of it to the Jewish people, a tiny little bit to the indigenous people in the only place that's ever been a Jewish homeland ever in history. Right, to allow us to have a little bit of it too would have been the most obvious thing for any indigenous supporting person to think about. There's different groups indigenous to the land. Let them all have bits of the land. Dividing the land is straightforward, right? And then, but who came to kill whom? It wasn't Israelis, Zionist Jews going out there trying to kill the locals. It was this ideology of we got to drive the Jews into the sea that came to kill the Jewish people. And as the Israel forces counterattacked, they fled their homes. And then what the Arab League could have done is said, okay, let's make peace with this Jewish entity, right? Peace with the Jewish state, and then most men can return to their homes. No, and even in 1967, no peace, no recognition, no negotiation. When Egypt made peace with Israel, right? It was kicked out the Arab League. How can you make peace with this entity? So what's this left-wing madness all about, right? And again, I think it's the same principle. Not everybody on the left is anti-Semitic. Not everyone on the left is anti-Israel. Not everyone on the left hates Israel. But it's very deep, very widespread on the left, this raging hatred of Israel. And Israel's come to symbolize for them anything evil in the world, right? So it's occupation and 75 years of occupation. You listen to that word, 75 years of occupation of what? Of the West Bank? Israel wasn't in the West Bank 75 years ago. Israel didn't even get into the West Bank till 14 Arab armies came to destroy it in 1967. Israel offered the land back for peace. So this raging lunacy